Thank you for joining me on A Quilting Tale today. My name is Shaylin, and this is the third and final video in a series I've been making on putting the Stars and Stripes Forever quilt top together, a pattern by Fig Tree & Company, using a quilt kit and the fabric line Catalina. It's an older Fig Tree & Company line. I mentioned before that they have a rosy line that's currently available that would work well with this pattern and achieve a similar look. But I've already done a video about piecing the flags and piecing the star blocks, and now I'm going to show you how I put it all together with the sashing and the finished quilt, minus the binding, but everything else is finished. It's been quilted, it's back from the long armor, so I will show you that at the end. So in this video, I thought I'd share some tips for piecing the top together and in what order, and also some tricks, because I realized that not all my pieces were the right size, and so I don't have enough fabric to redo them, and I really didn't want to try taking things apart. So I'm going to show you what I ended up doing when I ran into an unexpected dilemma, and so I'll address that later on. I'll also share with you how my homespun quilt is coming along. I've completed another month of that Block of the Month program, so that will be at the end. So let's get right into it. Picking up where I left off, I have placed my star strips under the flags and I've dispersed them in a way that I like. And I do need to point out something. I'm not entirely sure how it happened, but all of my blocks, the widths, are all anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 inch too short. And I'm not quite sure because some of the pieces are just a single strip, so it's not even like they got pieced with too big of a seam allowance or something. And I did spray all my fabric with Best Press before I cut, and so I just don't feel like it should have shrunk that much. And just the idea that they're all like that, I feel like, I don't know, I wasn't paying enough attention when I cut everything. I'm not sure. But it poses a problem because all of these star strips are longer. They both hang out a little over each edge. So I'm really going to have to try to center them. I don't want to cut off the points. So I'm going to need to make smaller seam allowances on these flags and then 1/4 inch seam allowances on the star strips to really make it work. So I'm going to try to center these star strips so that there's a little overhang on each side, and just hope that works out because I just don't have enough fabric in this kit to redo all my flags. Plus, that would be so much work. So I'm going to just try to fudge it a little bit as I put it together. All right, so my first attempt here seemed to work well. Since it's my star units that were the longest, I actually put them on the bottom when I sewed, because the feed dogs will kind of ease the bottom fabric in, so you don't get as much puckering as you might if you put the shorter end on the bottom. So I sewed it through like this. I backstitched at the beginning and at the end. And the hard part about this is you can't see the star tips. And even like this, there aren't intersecting lines to show the star tips. So I really had to just count on, that I had my tips 1/4 inch away. And when I opened it, I did have a couple where the tips got cut off a little bit. And so I ended up just removing a few stitches around that point and redoing a smaller seam there. So it's fixable, but I think this is going to work if I just start by pinning the ends and then the center, and then working my way out, keeping the star unit on the bottom. So I'm going to do these one at a time so they don't go out of order. So I'll just go from left to right, top to bottom, and get all 15 of my star strips connected to my flags. I'm going to press these toward the flag just to really get my tips nice and sharp here. And because my seam allowance will be under the red fabric, I'll just press them toward the flag. I thought I'd share a demonstration of how I've been pinning. So as you can see, this bottom star strip is a little wider. If it was significantly wider, I would probably pin with just a sliver sticking out on each side. Just because when I attach the sashing pieces, I can have a smaller seam on the flag and then the 1/4 inch seam on the star strip. This one isn't too bad. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch over on each side. So what I do is put the star strip on the bottom. I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to pin the ends first. And then as you can see when I hold it up, it's not flush and flat. It's longer on the star strip side. So you can see that kind of little arch there. So I'm just going to ease it in with pinning. So I'm going to try to get it as flat as I can and pull the center so that it's flush with my flag. And then I'm going to try to reduce the gap. Like on this side, it looks completely flat. But on this side, I can see more of that wave and more of the gap. So I'm going to pull it a little more to my right, just trying to even that wave out. So I've pinned it in half. And then I'm going to take the right half and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to try to get it as flat as I can while making it flush with the flag. And I'll pin it. Then I'll do the left half. Just again, as flat as I can get it. Trying to get all my edges flush with the flag strip. And so now I've made fourths, and each fourth I'm going to smooth out and get as flat as I can. And these ones are already looking pretty flat. But I'm just trying to make sure that the star strip is flush with the flag. So this one, there's a little bit of a gap, so I'm just going to try to ease it in. And same thing over here. It's a little gap, just easing it in. And then when I sew it, the flag is going to be on top because it was the shorter portion of the block. I'll back stitch, and I'm just going to really be careful. I can almost see the tips through. I can see the dark blue, but I'm just going to trust my 1/4 inch. You could even do slightly less than a 1/4 inch, and then if it doesn't hit the point, then you can go over it, make it a little thicker. But I'm just going to go a 1/4 inch down and then back stitch when I get to the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to press toward my red strip here. And there were a few spots that they didn't quite hit the point, but I noticed this point is shorter than this one, and this one hit just right. Same here. This one's a little shorter. So rather than try and make it dip and go up, I'm just going to leave it as is. So there's little design choices you'll have to make if not everything is perfectly sized. But I'm going to start with a dry iron just up toward the red strip. I'm going to spray it with my mister bottle, just tap water. Just really want to make sure my points are nice and sharp there. Now here's one where you can see there's a bit of white hanging over on each edge, more so on this one. I didn't center it quite perfectly here, but I still figure as long as it's 1/8 of an inch or less, when I put the sashing strips on, I'll align it to the bigger piece, the wider piece here. And so I'll sew my 1/4 inch, and when I go down by the flag, it might just be catching 1/8 of an inch in the seam allowance, and I think that will still be fine. I wouldn't want it much smaller than that, because then you risk, you know, as you wash it, or if it frays or anything, you don't want it too close to the seam line. But I think I'd be comfortable with 1/8 of an inch seam up top here, having a 1/4 inch here, and with the back stitching on each end. And if I press toward the flags, I think it'll just be a little more protected in the seam allowance, those threads. So I think it's going to work. So this quilt really is just an experiment with what to do when your pieces just aren't sized the way you thought they would be, and you just don't have the fabric or means to start it all over. I want to make it work with this, so I'm just going to keep playing with it and see what my end result will be. I've got all those star strips sewn to the bottoms of the flags, so now it's time to make the sashing strips. In my kit, I have this cream dot that's going to be the sashing between the flags at the tops, bottoms, and sides of the flags. And when I cut my flag pieces and some of the star pieces, I cut these D pieces, which are going to be the cornerstones that go between some of the sashing. And so once everything's sashed together, I'll also cut the inner and outer borders and attach those. So that's what we have left to do to finish the top. I've got all my sashing strips placed where they need to go. So I'll have these 2.5 inch strips below the flags and to the side of them. And the way I'm going to sew these are in columns. So I'm going to sew a flag to a sashing strip, to a flag, to a sashing strip, all the way to the bottom, where it will end with a sashing strip. Then I'm going to sew the vertical sashing strip. These ones will be nice and quick and easy. There's cornerstones. I'll be pressing toward the sashing strips, both horizontally and vertically, so that these will nest together later. Then I'll do the same with the 3rd column. So just sewing the sashing strips beneath each flag with a sashing strip ending at the end of the column. Now the center column is a little different. It's going to be offset a bit. It's not going to line up with the 1st and 3rd. There's actually a thinner sashing strip on top, and then only 4 of the regular size sashing strips. And at the bottom of this one is a thin sashing strip. So I'm going to sew these vertical strips to the cornerstones. I'll attach the 1st column to the 1st vertical strip. Then I'll do the 3rd column and attach it to the vertical strip. And then there won't be anything to nest when I attach the middle section. So I'll attach the middle to this 1st third of the quilt, and then I'll attach those pieces to the final column. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing that. I'm going to be careful of those 1/4 inch seam allowances where I don't want to cut off my points. So I'll be watching for that. And again, if my sashing strips are a little too short or long compared to my block, if it's not the exact size, I will put whichever piece is longer on the bottom, just like I was doing before. All right, the main portion of the top is all sewn together, and I'm loving how it looks. I just need to add the inner and outer borders now. One tip that I will share that helps, since the center column is offset and these sashing strips don't line up with the cornerstones, what they did line up with were some of the seams in the star units. So this one, for example, I pinned at the very top just to make sure that they lined up at the end. And then I'd pin where the seams nested here, and then put a few pins in between. Then I'd move down and I'd land at like this one, for example, again, they'd line up in the star unit. So pin there and then put a few pins in between. So I did that all the way to the end and made sure that the ends also lined up. I pressed everything toward the sashing. And so now I'm just going to cut my border strips and get those on to complete the top. Here is the finished quilt top. It just needs the binding, but I took it to the long armor and had these really cute swirly stars quilted all over it in a light blue thread. You can see that there's that small inner border and then the bright blue outer border. I have a red gingham binding that I'm going to use on this one. And this quilt finishes at 58 inches by 71 inches. I just love the bright, cheerful colors. It's kind of a reddish orange in the flag. And I just think it looks so cheerful for the summer. Here's a little peek at the back as well. It has that orangey red main floral print on the back, and I think it's just lovely. And that light blue thread makes the stars and swirls show up nicely, but not too busy. So I really like the choice of the light blue thread for this one. Now to wrap up this video, I thought I would share the progress on my Homespun Collective Block of the Month and show you the latest blocks that I've made for this quilt. This block of the month comes with access to pre-quilt, so here's a reminder of the colors I selected for my quilt. I'm going to go with a Christmas theme, and this month we focused on quarter square triangles and the clover blocks. I used confetti cotton brick and basil, and then Art Gallery Fabrics Latte for the colors here. It also required almost 100 3/4 inch squares. So I kept track of all those little pieces in a dish, and I learned some great tips for working with pieces this small. We use them to snowball some corners, and so putting dabs of glue on the part that's going to get cut off really helped keep them in place and keep them from shifting. I also got to use the tool set that I won from month one, which included this Hera marker from Modern American Vintage. And it worked well to mark lines to make my quarter square triangles. We also used the remnants of this month's blocks to make bonus blocks for a second quilt that all the leftover fabric will be making. So this one is a mystery, and this month we made these sawtooth stars in 2 different sizes. And I also thought it would be fun to just put all the main blocks together to kind of get an idea of how they're all looking together. So here are all the ones that I've made so far. I hope you've enjoyed watching my Stars and Stripes Forever quilt come together over the last few videos and watching the progress on the homespun quilt. That's one that I will definitely continue working on this summer. It should wrap up in September, and I should end up with a wonderful Christmas quilt come the fall. I have lots of plans this summer, including binding 5 quilts that have come back from the long armor over the last few months. I also have a few smaller projects in mind, and I might be starting a couple new projects. You may have noticed this one behind me. I decided to take on a summer sew along. This is called Stars in My Garden. It's a 9-patch-a-day summer sew along for 2026, hosted by Karen Montgomery, and she's showing a video presentation right now, which I'll link in the description below. Some of the videos that have come out so far to get me to this point. I'm using my Morris & Company fabrics that I've just been accumulating, and I thought this is a nice, elegant looking pattern that I want to use those fabrics on. And so I've been really excited to start putting these pieces together. And this is just a little sampling of some of the petals that I've been making in the center 9 patches. And so that summer sew along is only available in video form. There isn't an actual pattern to print until the summer sew along is over, and then I believe she will put it in printed form where you can purchase it. But if you want to do it for free and just follow along with her directions, you can print off the materials list and the cutting directions. You can get it from her Facebook group, 9 Patch a Day, or if you're not on Facebook, she mentioned in her video just taking a screenshot when she holds up the directions. So it's a free sew along, but it's going to be video based and not a written pattern. And her directions are always very clear and easy to follow. I'm actually doubling the size. And so I have to do a little bit of math to make sure I have the right number of pieces when I double it. But like I said, her directions and her teaching style is wonderful, and I always learn so much from her. So this is definitely a project I'll be working on. I also have ongoing projects that I've been sharing, and I might introduce a couple smaller ones. I know there's a Fat Quarter Shop Halloween mystery quilt that I should be getting the kit for at some point. I ordered it back in, I think it was November, or maybe it was during their 12 days of Christmas last year in 2025. So I'm looking forward to that project coming to make a small little wall quilt. And I also got the Tilda Something Blue fabric line. So I have a special video planned for that. I'm getting ready to go out of state for a couple weeks, so I'm hoping to get that out before I go, otherwise for sure when I'm back. But lots of plans, lots of good things to look forward to. I hope you will like this video and subscribe so you can see some of those upcoming projects. Hope you're having a wonderful summer. Happy sewing, and I'll see you soon.